Welcome to Romera Records virtual cast. Today we have Andrea on. How's it going?
It's going quite well. Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, yeah. So basically, like a lot of people, I've had you on from Podmatch, and I just saw what you do, so I was interested in having you on. So I guess let's just go ahead and get into who you are, what you do, and how you got started.
Sure. Again, my name is Andrea Johnson. I'm a transformational leadership coach, and I work with people who feel kind of stifled in what they do, either in corporate or as entrepreneurs, especially with women, helping them to find a new culture by understanding how to think critically, create imaginatively, and lead effectively. And I am also certified with the John Maxwell team. So I'm a DISC certified consultant where I help others figure out their communication style, and I work with teams, helping them figure out how to communicate together. But it's a little bit like teaching people how to speak another language. When I learn how to speak the language that you need to hear, I communicate with you better. So I do a little bit of that. But I also just enjoy getting to know people and mentoring and coaching. And I work with mostly in my private practice, I work with women. So this is kind of the life that I've chosen after 25 years in higher education medical administration.
So I think I'm going to go ahead and start with asking you a similar question that I had asked. Gosh, I can't remember her name. I think it was Jen Patterson. I had her on one of my podcasts, and she does like budget things for females, which gets into my
Sure.
question. So,
Okay.
or like money management. So my question is, did you specifically decide that you wanted to work with females just because one, you are one, or was it because you feel like, you feel like females might not have the help that they should get in your field of study? What made you specifically want to help females in general?
Well, when we talk about women in leadership, that is a very specific niche. And I come from a evangelical Christian background where women are not in leadership. And women's voices are not held in high regard in leadership. There are pockets where they are, but just in general, I'm making a very sweeping term. And when I started learning about leadership and how I had suppressed my own voice, I realized that I needed to help other women figure this out. And I needed to help other women understand that no matter where they were, no matter what situation they were in, they could still be a good leader. They could figure out how to do it within the context of their own demographic, whether they stayed in it or not. My mother was an extremely strong woman, a stubborn woman, a powerful woman, and she managed to stay within the confines of what I would just call evangelical patriarchy, in a not in a terrible way, but in a nice way. Just this, the idea of men are first, women are second. um, she managed to do that in a way that met her own needs and met other people's needs. My parents were missionaries, and my mother, I kind of grew up in Seoul, Korea, and my mother volunteered for the Red Cross and figured out that that was a way that she could do different kind of work than what she was used to. But she also rose through the ranks where she was working with dignitaries. If you have a military background, she was a GS-13 with no pay. So that was basically like a light colonel. And so she took dignitaries to the DMZ in Korea, and she did all of that. But that was her way of understanding how she could lead from a place where she felt comfortable within her belief system. And so my desire was to, because I've shed a little bit of that belief system, and my desire was to help women find a place where they could belong to themselves in a leadership way, whether it was in their families or in their church or their community or in a business or in their corporate job, that they would be able to reconcile with themselves. Sometimes that means we have to change, but sometimes that means we just, or we get to unleash some things, or we need to let go of some things. But women, as you kind of hinted at, don't always have a voice pointed specifically at them for this particular type of thing. I consider myself to have gone through some deconstruction, and I am not the woman who left the church. I have plenty of things to say about it, and I have plenty of critiques, but I have not left my faith. And so that's a unique position. And I figure when I have a unique voice, I can share it with other women to help them understand that they have a unique voice.
Yeah, I was actually on TikTok yesterday, and I was listening to some girl talk about like all the things that you can do to help your man not cheat on you and stuff like that. And she was like saying stuff like, make sure he has food when he comes home and make sure
Oh
the
yeah.
house is clean and stuff like that. And I was like, this is absolutely ridiculous
Yeah.
because, well, number one, um, I think that everything that she said are things that a couple should, first of all, agree upon as far
Mm.
as like shared duties as
Mhm.
like so number one, if you're a guy or gal and you're together, there is no like, understood this is your job. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
everybody's if you were single, who's going to get you
All of
the
them are
food?
your job,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
right?
So it's absolutely insane
Yeah.
that this chick even got one like on this video, which it had thousands
It
because
is surprising to me that this is a big movement right now, and it's a pushback. I'll date myself. I'm gonna go ahead and tell you, I'm 57, and so I am a child of the 80s. I'm a Gen Xer, and one of the books that just really opened my eyes, because I'm from the Southern Baptist tradition, and so one of the books that really opened my eyes was Jesus and John Wayne by Kristen Dumas, and I went through that book and noted that I know this person, I know that person, I've met them, I sat under their teaching, all these things, and then there were huge chapters where I was like, that explains this thing. I don't understand why we were doing it this way. And so, if you're interested in where these kinds of things come from, that book is revolutionary and just it's a good historical book that tells you kind of where some of these things come from. But it's what we're seeing is this throwback to this idea that men have to be helped along in their ability to be good. And if I were a man, I would be so insulted because that's not I whenever I look at this masculinity versus femininity and the Christian masculinity and the patriarchy that goes along with that, I told my husband, I said, that just makes me think that y'all are really weak. I mean, how is this supporting men? This is tearing men down. And it's a thing that we do that in our culture right now that it if you don't want your husband to cheat on you, then y'all need to have a really good relationship. It has nothing to do with meeting him at the door in nothing but an apron. And I mean, that's from a really old book, right? This is really old stuff that's coming back around. And, I watched my mother, this was a point of what I would call cognitive dissonance in my life for a long time. And I watched my mother read some of these books and I didn't know what they meant, and these missionary women would joke about this kind of stuff, but the reality was, yeah, whatever. We're just gonna have a good relationship. And as I when I got married, I married a guy that when you look at my mom and my dad in the traditional male and female role, and then me and my husband, it's switched. I own the power tools. I do the finances. I mean, it's just that's how it is. He is the researcher. He helps my son with his homework. And I'm not a less feminine woman because of that. But just like you said, we figured out early on the roles that we do best. That's how we best serve our marriage.
hmm,
And so I think part of my, if you want to call it a mission, is to help women see that they don't have to conform themselves into society's mold. They can actually be themselves because they were created uniquely for a unique purpose with unique things that they can bring to the world. And if we're constantly trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, then we're shaving off pieces of ourselves that we need to be offering. And we're doing ourselves a disservice, our families, our spouses, our companies, our organizations, our schools, our churches, all of them a disservice when we don't show up as ourselves.
yeah, and I think you have established this happy medium that I think it's hard for some people to swallow because a lot of people like excuses, right? Like people love an
Oh,
excuse.
we all love
Yeah.
excuses.
And that because an excuse allows you to feel comfortable with your shortcomings.
Mhm.
And I think most people think that there needs to be this dominant female that, doesn't, she's very not just angry, but just very aggressive and like, I don't need a man, and that's that boss lady CEO. That's that executive. Or there's the housewife that submits to her man and does
Mm-hmm.
whatever he says. But like it's like nobody realizes like, hey, there's a happy medium
Yeah.
between those two. Like you don't have to be this angry woman who just bosses people around all the time because she feels like, I'm a woman and I need to have power and stuff like that. And then you don't have to be the submissive housewife. Like you can find the happy medium and you can still be happy in life.
Yeah, and I like to use word pictures. I like because as a communicator, I want to make sure that everybody hears the message, right? So I like to use analogies and word pictures. And the one I use for that kind of thinking that you're talking about is that all or nothing. It's the spectrum. And if you did you ever have like my in-laws had this giant grandfather clock in their house. And now they have a small one and it makes the same Big Ben noises. So when we go, they have to turn the alarms the chimes off because it like wakes us up in the middle of the night. But and I grew up with clocks. My dad actually made a few clocks, but the long pendulum, when it swings back and forth, those extreme ends are not, that's just the marking of the time. What's happening in between the pendulums is all the real time, right? It's like in between each second is all of that's where life happens.
Hmm.
And so when we try to put ourselves at one end or the other of the pendulum swing, we're only there for a split second. It can't be maintained. If you stop a pendulum or you just don't wind a clock, the pendulum is going to fall in the middle. It's going to fall plumb, just like it would directly straight up and down. And so whenever we try to put ourselves on these continuums that really are very dynamic and have no business being quote unquote static, like where we say, I'm on this side. And we see this in politics right now. It's just horrible. It's like all the way on this side of the pendulum on the right, or all the way on this side of the pendulum on the left. And I'm like, y'all don't understand. That's only 2%. 98% is in between these two
Hmm.
viewpoints. And so it's not even that I'm looking for a medium, it's that I'm looking for a third way or a reasonable understanding. And I'm looking for non-fear based and non exaggerated. And sometimes I'm just looking for facts. So when we lay things out for people and say it doesn't have to be this way or that way, what do you see? And I talk to people about stepping off the continuum. Just step out, right? You don't have to be right or left. Just step out and say, when you're looking at it from that angle, my son's in geometry this year and he's a freshman in high school. And so when you step out from that one line, then you create a triangle, right? So, and the reality is that is the strongest shape in nature. There's a reason why we do roofs with triangles on the top, right? It's because it's the strongest shape. And so when we have that third view, then we tend to be stronger together as a community. And that's my goal, is to have good community to where we all belong and we all can have a voice. And so when people say you strike a happy medium, like it's a little more than that, but I see where you're coming from. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, when you were just talking about even with politics as well, it really is more people are in the middle than they choose to really believe
Hmm.
because, most people are either Democratic or Republican, but I think it's all about just choosing a side and just picking a side. It's not really about all the values that people have in their lives. It's really they're just like, well, these are really my two options of, who's
Hmm.
going to win. We haven't had an independent person win in forever. And when it comes to like presidential, so
Oh, yeah. And
it,
we won't and until we don't have a two-party system, we won't.
yeah, yeah. So it's something for people to understand about themselves is how can I be the best version of me,
Hmm.
specifically women, staying on this topic,
Hmm.
how can I be the best version of me without conceding
Hmm.
to society's ideal female when it comes to relationships, or even if you're single, like
Hmm.
trying to make sure you are the best version of you without, if you're looking for a spouse, having to be like, well, now that I'm with somebody, I need to change my life. It's like, no, just they want to be with you because of who you are. So
Right.
just continue to grow as a person,
Right.
and do the things that you're trying to do.
Hmm. Yeah, and when I married, quote unquote, late in my family, my mother and my sister both met their spouses in 10th grade. And so
Okay.
when I was 26, yeah, it's like when I was 26, 10 years later down the road, and I wasn't yet married, my mother would set a place at Christmas saying, "This is for your future husband." I'm like, seriously? Um, and I know she meant well. And we lost her in 2017 to breast cancer, but and my husband is her biggest fan. And he also misses her probably more than the rest of us do. But it was because she loved big, right? But I think that one, just going back to really quickly, the marriage piece, and then I'd like to give an answer to how you become the best person you can be, is we didn't go into our marriage thinking we were 50-50 and we were going to complete each other. Part of getting married, quote unquote, later, I was 27. Now I'm like, if somebody's talking to me at 27 that wants to get married, I'm like, are you sure you don't want to wait a little while? um, because I know even at 27, I was not mature enough. So I really admire people who can get married younger and actually make it work. My husband and I have been married 29 years this May.
Mm,
But I don't know what would have happened if we'd married at 21 or 22, you know.
yeah.
But we went into our marriage knowing that we were each 100%. And I met him in seminary, in grad school, and I went not knowing whether or not I would get married. I went thinking it's possible that I'll get a theology degree and I'll be a missionary and I may not marry. And that has to be enough,
Mm,
right? So, figuring out who you are, what you stand for, why you believe what you believe, what your core values are, all those things are what make you what I call magnetic. When I talk to leaders, I just did a webinar yesterday morning, and it's basically, I just call it magnetic leadership. And it's this idea that understanding your core values, which are your internal compass, they are the way you are wired. They are not the things you believe. They're intangible but documentable. Like, I have a client who one of her top core values is respect. So whether or not somebody is respected and how they respond to being respected is very documentable. But it's not something that you can look at and say, here's my value, it's respect. But when you understand your core values, you then have the authority that you need to be yourself because you know who you are and you don't have to apologize for it.
mm,
These are not things that you choose to believe about yourself. They are things that you already are, which kind of throws people. Um, but when you know that you have your own authority, then you find when you find out who you are, you have the conviction to do what you need to do. And for me, stepping out of some of the circles that I had been in and being able to say, I'm going to stand for women's leadership, that pits me against certain political things. You know, it pits me on both sides of the aisle, but it pits me against certain church things. But I now have the conviction I need because I know who I am. But then it also gives me the confidence to lead. And when you have the confidence to remember who you are and have the conviction to do what you need to do, it feeds it and it becomes this beautiful cycle of reminding you who you are every single day, reminding you how God created you to be. That's what I believe. And then it allows you to be this magnetic leader. When people see you as authentic and they know you're being you, it's really attractive.
mm,
I mean, if, and I don't know where you come from in the belief system that I'm talking about, but I believe that God created me in his image. And I think part of that image is this unique creativity that I have, this unique authenticity, this unique ability to think wild things and to like celebrate and be silly. I think all of those things are part of what make me created in his image. And like you said, if I tried to change that, for after I got married, then my husband would be like, "Who are you? I didn't marry that. I married this unique creature that God created."
mm.
And I remember one time before I went on a date when I was living at home after college, before I went to seminary, my mother said, "Now remember, don't talk too much." Why? Well, because, you kind of want somebody to marry you. And I'm like, they're going to find out I talk all the time, Mom. I mean, this is I mean, she meant well, but it just, it didn't work. And I knew it then. And it took me 20 years to figure out how to best describe it. To be able to say, this is who I am, this is what I stand for, and this is why. So that's the work that I do with people is I work with them on understanding their core values, who they are, their disc wiring, how they communicate it. And then I have a personal growth lifestyle I call intentional optimism, which is basically how we do what we do. We live it out with, we live our values and our goals and our beliefs out with grace and with excellence. And that's how I work with people.
Yeah, something that you were touching on is about just having sheer confidence in who you are, because if you don't have confidence in who you are, you're going to struggle to be a good leader and to just assist other people. I always give people this example, which half of us are paying attention on the airplane when they're going over everything. But they always tell you, put on your air mask first and then help somebody else. It's because you need to take care of yourself first, and
Mm,
then you can start helping others. And
right.
that's a great way to show people how, if you aren't confident in what you're doing, other people aren't going to care about. Like, if you saw one person getting up and helping everybody else put their mask on, you, but that's nice. But what's
Mm,
going to happen to that guy?
mhm,
So it's
yeah.
always important for people to be able to be comfortable in who they are, and
Yeah.
they can assist and give other people's guidance.
Well, and a lot, we like to invest in programs. We like to invest in leadership programs or MBA or some kind of job related like certifications. I have several of them. If you look at my slide deck, you'd be like, "What are all those letters?" It's like, well, that was my way that I tried to prove my worth. And it's not that those things are useless. It's not that they're bad. I mean, I come from the medical profession, the administrative side. So it's like you need an MD and a PhD. And I mean, I didn't, but they did. And um, but we get ourselves on this hamster wheel of thinking that that's how we're going to prove our worth.
Mm,
And so I love to say to people, it's not what you do that makes you valuable or impactful. It's who you are that makes you valuable and impactful. I could put all this stuff on my resume and I could be the first one in and the last person out. But if I show up in a job interview and all I have is my resume and I have none of my unique personality showing, they're not going to hire me. And I was at Johns Hopkins for almost 12 years. And then we wanted to move closer. My family was in Richmond, Virginia. And so this was in Baltimore, and we wanted to move closer. And I sent out, I kid you not, over 300 resumes.
mm,
My husband was ready to take a sabbatic. We had just adopted our son, and I was going to be the breadwinner. And I was ready to take a good step up in university administration or anything. I was willing to take a secretarial job in DC because they would pay $95,000. I mean, I was willing to do that. And I sent out, again, over 300 resumes. And my mom one day said, "Have you sent anything to the University of Virginia?" And I'm like, I couldn't get hired there. And as says the woman who's been working at Johns Hopkins for the last 12 years, it's like, how does that not like register at all? And I looked on the website. There was a job I was qualified for. I put in one resume. Within 2 days, I had an interview. Within a week, I had an in-person interview, and I was offered that job within 3 weeks of applying. It was
mm,
the only resume that even got a response. But part of what happened was they said to me, "Andrea, you had an X factor. When we talked to you on the phone, we knew that you were going to do whatever you needed to do." And
mm,
that's what my mom kept saying to me. Your resume gets you in the door, but once they meet you, Andrea, I have only been not hired for two jobs maybe that I actually applied for and got an interview on.
mm,
And one of them was because I was like, they already had somebody for the job, and so they had to interview another person just to say we interviewed two.
uh,
But then that guy turned around and tried to create a job for me because he liked me so much.
mm,
And the controller for the UVA medical school was in the room, and she actually helped me get my next job at a different department. And so knowing who you are and being able to show up as you fully and hit it out of the park, if you're interviewing for a job, if you're interviewing people, if you're trying to get noticed, like I noticed you do a media group, if you're showing up on camera or on film or on the radio, or because I have a background in music business. When you show up as 100% yourself, that's what they call the X factor. That's what they look at and they say, "Oh, this person has charisma. This person has magnetism." And we want so badly for to be able to answer those things and fulfill that peace in us and show people that by outward accomplishments, but it just doesn't happen that way. It's
Mm.
always from the inside out.
Yeah. So something I do want to talk about because you keep bringing stuff up. What 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 have you done? Like you
Sorry, I'm a pot stirrer.
Oh my so I love this because actually one I had on a guy named Jeff Seckendorf, and he was telling me about like he's a like a scuba diver instructor, and then he was talking about being a pilot, and then he was talking about he worked on movies and he worked on some he was trying to explain to me. Do you know what Need for Speed is?
Oh,
The
sure.
video. He was trying to explain to me what Need for Speed. I was like, Jeff, I know what Need for Speed. He was the director of photography for the video
Oh,
game Need for Speed.
wow.
I forgot which one, Hot Pursuit or something. And then he also like I was like, oh, he's 69 years old and he's
Hmm.
about to try and set the record for biking the furthest distance in 1 hour for his age
Mm.
group. I was like, dude, what have you done? So you're starting to do that to me as well. But what are
For
all the things?
starters, I'm only 57. But I will say I hit 50, and that was the catalyst for me. As I said, I've been playing by all the rules. I have been, doing what society tells me to do, and I am not where I want to be. And I lost my mother at 50, and I said, that's it. I am not going to, it just, when you lose a loved one, it makes you look at where you are. If you're at all introspective at all, you will take a look at where you are in the grief process and say, is this trajectory that I'm on where I want to be at the end? I mean, what do I want on my tombstone, right?
Mm,
And I'm I think I might know what I want on my tombstone. I just want my husband and my son to be really sad that I'm gone, that they're missing me. But um what have I done? Well, I was raised overseas. My dad was a mission, my parents were missionaries, and so I was raised in Seoul, Korea. So I've been traveling since I was 7. And my dad was a private pilot. So we started in Wyoming, Southeast Texas to Wyoming, and so I've lived a lot of places. Um, I think when I got married, I realized I had moved 17 different times.
wow.
And yeah, there are ways that that's not great, and there are ways that it was quite the education.
Mhm.
First time I went to Hawaii, I was 7, so, but that's halfway between Korea and the United States, so, or the mainland. So you kind of have to stop there, of course,
Mm.
right? It makes the travel easier.
Yeah.
Um, and so I grew up overseas. I went to school with kids from 65 different countries, which means that I had this really broad worldview of what it means to be a human. And I mean, there were only 30 people in my graduating class. I was in an international school, international baccalaureate school, and I have friends all over the globe that I graduated from high school with.
Mm.
And that changes the way you see things. But my parents were from Southeast Texas, so we would come back on furlough every 3 to 4 years and lived in Southeast Texas, right down where Hurricane Rita hit, right at the junction of Louisiana and Texas, right down there, the Golden Triangle, they call it. And so we would come back there, and it was a stark difference to me. But it was also part of this was the fabric of my life. So they said this was always home. I ended up starting my college career in Houston at Houston Baptist University, and switched halfway through going to Nashville to Belmont College before it was Belmont University. I was the last graduating class of Belmont College.
Mm.
And so they gave us two, it's really fun. They gave us two diplomas. They gave us one that says Belmont College and one that says Belmont University. And I went there because I had started off as a nursing major, and I'm good at it. I'm very empathetic. And my dad, who is super practical, said, Andrea, you will never be without a job. And of course, how could he know? But prescient down the ages, I mean, good grief. I'm kind of glad I wasn't a nurse during COVID, but still, I can see where we are always in a shortage of nurses, but it was not where I needed to be. And a friend of mine said, I'm going to Nashville. I'm going to go to the music business program. I'm like, well, do tell. What is that? Because I was a singer, and I did lots of musical theater. We were watching a commercial the other night, and I think it was, I don't even remember what it was for, but it was, this song came on and it was getting to know you, getting to know all about you. And I'm like, what is that from? And then I was like, but I know all the words. And it's either from Sound of Music or Oliver, I don't know, but it was one that I had actually participated in. And so I knew all the words.
Mm.
And so that was very common for me. In the summer, I did lots of musical theater. And I was a lifeguard on a beach in Korea that was just not far from mainland China. And but growing up in Korea gave me a different perspective as well because it was during the 70s and 80s when there was a lot of activity from North Korea.
Mm.
And so there's some trauma there just because of some things that happened. I didn't always feel safe. But I had this community of people that I now call family. I I have physically one aunt on my mother's side and an uncle, and I had an aunt, she passed away as well on my dad's side. But I have probably 60 aunts and uncles throughout the United States and the world that were from the missionary community that we just called them aunts and uncles because everybody left their family behind. So it's very different. But I ended up in Nashville following my friend up there, and got my music business degree, which is a BBA, which means that I could work anywhere. I took all my economics and all that kind of stuff. But I ended up working for a gentleman named Bob Malloy because he was head of the music business department. He started it, and he didn't have a secretary at the time, and I needed a job. And I noticed in the music business program, I'm like, this is you need some help, dude. And so I walked into his office, talk about chutzpah. I walked in and I said, I need a job and you need a secretary. Should we work something out? And he goes, okay, sit down over there at that computer, learn Word Perfect, and let's get going. Do you know that man paid me for 2 years out of his personal checking account?
Oh my gosh.
And through him, I learned so much. He was like having a second father. And it gave me a whole new view on kind of what the music business is. At the time, that was the height of Christian music industry. When I graduated, I ended up going out to Los Angeles to work for Sparrow Records. At the time, that was when they were out there. They are now back in Brentwood. But at the time, I'm familiar with Christian music from the 90s.
I am not.
Oh, okay. Well, you might be familiar with BB and CC Winans or
Yes.
Tremaine Hawk, Southern Gospel. So I went to work for Sparrow Records in there. I was the administrative assistant for marketing, Black Gospel, and radio promotions. So I got to know radio promoters all over the United States. And gosh, that was fun. Um, and at the time, we had Denise Williams and the Winans and Tremaine Hawkins, and Vicky Mac Latad was my boss. She has her own record company as well now. And that was the job where I learned the hard lesson of working hard to get ahead will not help you, because when you come in early and stay late, all you do is develop a bad attitude and you get burnout.
Mm.
And I nearly got fired from that job because of that. And so that's a lesson that I carry into talking about core values, because I learned that this is a myth that we think, oh, I'm going to come in first and leave last, and they're going to promote me because they can see how hard I work. Nope, they're just going to keep riding you until you fall down. And if they care about you, they're going to tell you, hey, stop. This is a bad attitude you got going here, or you're gonna wear yourself out, and this is not good. And she was willing to do that. She was willing to say the hard things to me, and so that I did that, but I didn't last in Los Angeles even a whole year. It's a rough town. I was very lonely. I was sad. Came back to work for another Christian record company, Benson, in Nashville, and by the end of a full year in the music industry, I was done. I was toast. I had friends who I still have friends. One is the COO of a pretty big, you will have heard of it, music, like a label, music group. And I had a friend who worked for Alan Jackson for a long time. I lived 2 doors down from Leanne Womack. I mean, it was just a lot happens at Belmont. It is the school to go to if you're not going to NYU. It is the school to go to for music business, and it is fabulous. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. And there are times I look back and I wish I had stuck with it, but I also realized that just wasn't my path. It was fun. And it was something I did. And I mean, even, gosh, one of the guys that I was in a band with did all the music for Big Sky. And, it's just, I can see their names different places. A guy that I used to pay in milk and cookies to come do my studio work as an engineer. Um, has done work in Abbey Road Studios. And another guy that I worked with does all of Garth Brooks's sound. So it's like I have these people that I could be in touch with, but it's just that's not where I'm supposed to be. And so I left the music industry and then just kind of went to work as an assistant, like an administrative assistant. And that was hard time for me because I thought I had big dreams. I was going to do all this stuff. But I was learning those hard lessons of I have to be me. I can't be somebody else. And the other piece that I talk about with people is what I call my ABCs, which is my assumptions, my beliefs, and my conditioning. And they're like an iceberg. Your assumptions are at the top. These are things that other people see, and sometimes they hold up a mirror and go, "What is that?" Or you get into a conversation and you realize, "Wow, I was assuming something here that just isn't true." So that's the first piece of your awareness that starts. This is kind of the ABCs of awareness. But then underneath that lies your beliefs, which are fed by your conditioning. Sometimes they're fed by your assumptions, but your beliefs are all changeable. They're right at the waterline. They can go up and down. But the conditioning is something that we've, number one, been raised in, but number two, then eventually participated in. Because if you look at an iceberg, all that stuff underneath the water, all that conditioning, it doesn't get there without any help.
Mm.
So I look back now and I realize I was kind of navigating those waters of understanding my own beliefs. And it was rough. I mean, before I even graduated from college, I was in the hospital for bulimia and depression just because I needed some help. And that's where I started my personal growth journey. And so I look back and say, yep, all of that played a part. All of it is important. And by the time I was 20, I guess 25, I was ready to go to seminary to get my master's of divinity. And so when I went to Fort Worth to school, that's where I met my husband. And I just was sure I was just going to do all of these amazing things. And it took me a while to understand that amazing things come in different packages. um, I thought I was going to be a mom to a bunch of kids, and I went into very premature early menopause at 38. So we adopted, and I ended up having gastric bypass surgery. So I've done a lot, and I've seen a lot, and I've traveled a lot. But my very best work is sitting across from someone and helping them see who they are and their own uniqueness, and to realize all the things, everything that they've ever done, every opinion they've ever had, every reaction they've ever had, every argument, every joy has been affected or touched in some way by their core values. And so when you come down to something elemental like that, it's like, oh, I can look back through my entire past and see that I was trying to be authentic there, and I was trying to belong there, and I was trying, because these are my core values, right? So being able to look back over my journey and see that gives me the energy and the hope to do it for others today.
Something that I really picked up from all the things you were talking about is just like you just kept trying things. So you just kept
Yeah.
doing things. You didn't stick with a job that you had gotten and then just like ponder, what if I did this? What if I did that? You just did it. And that's something I really admire. And I always tell people, like, just fail. Like, try to
Mm.
fail as
Hmm.
much as possible because I guarantee you're going to succeed at something. And if your success might be telling people about your failures, like that might
Sure.
that might be your success. So it's very important that people do exactly everything that you were doing, and that is your story. Like, everything that you were just talking about is great when you're talking to people about leadership and guiding them on how to become the best version of them, is because you are more believable because you've been through things. Like when
Mm.
people if I'm talking to somebody and like let's say somebody who was born into like royalty or something like,
Mm.
it's going to be hard to take their advice on struggles and stuff. It's like what? Like,
Define struggle.
exactly. Like you've had this cush life, and so I think that it's important for people to talk about their struggles and
Mm,
stuff like that. And I love asking people that on my podcast of like, what have you done? Like what has been the hardest part about what you've done and that kind of stuff because it's a better story. It's more
yeah.
believable to
Mm,
people because it's relatable. Like they're like, I've been failing too. Like I thought I was the only person who did that. So yeah, it's great hearing that you and again going on the topic of being a female, like you walked into that dude's office and was like, hey, I need a job. You need an assistant. Hire me. And
yeah. And, the first check he gave me was his personal check. And I thought, well, this is different. Because I had been working at the university. I was in the admissions office. God, that's awful. And, just I got to be around people and like in stuff. And, I'm a people person. And so you'd think being admissions would work, but it's really a lot of regulations. And I would take my check from the school and I would sign the back of it and I'd hand it over to pay for my tuition. And that was just like, I was a pass through, right? It's like I never got to see it. And I was blessed eventually to get a grant that basically paid for all of my schooling.
mm,
So I was one of those rare birds who did not go into school with money. I went in looking for grants. I went in looking for, I didn't have to do a lot of loans. The one that I thought was a loan was through the religious affairs department. And for a year after I graduated, the whole time I was suffering in California, of all places, I kept saying, I need to start paying this back, even if it's just $5 a month. And they just kept putting me off and putting me off. And they came back and said, we've been waiting for this endowment to reach endowment status so that we can turn all of those loans that we gave people into grants. And you're the
mm,
first one that we're going to turn it into a grant. I'm like, what? So um happy dance galore, right? So but I think it's just really it's important to understand too that I wasn't chasing failure. I wasn't looking to fail. And every time I did, I suffered through years of depression. I mean, I had 7 years of clinical depression, and I don't hide from that. And I took medication, and I have had so much counseling, but it's made me a better person, and it's made me understand that failing is not the end. It just isn't. Like I said, I'm a Maxwell leadership consultant. And this last year for Maxwell does, John Maxwell, if you're not familiar with him, he's a global leadership guru. He actually helps other nations actually with their leadership. And he has a program for you can become a certified team member, disc consultant, trainer using his books, et cetera. And every year he does a program called Live to Lead. And this last year, where he pulls in special um, speakers and consultants, and it's a thing where it's a simulcast, and then we can share it and we can use it. Like I'll have a license for it this year, and I can share it and use it in my community or online. And this last year, it was some fabulous speakers. John Maxwell, of course. Kendra Scott was one of them, the jewelry company
mhm.
lady. Um, and Marcus Buckingham from Gallup, he used to be with Gallup and did the Strengths Finders, and it was all about finding love and work. But the one that my husband actually participated because we did a live thing here in Charlottesville, and it was the first time I'd put on a conference. It's like I've put on a conference. What? Um, but my husband was really excited about this guy named Ryan Leake. Have you heard of Ryan Leake?
Sounds familiar.
Okay. So John Maxwell wrote a book called Failing Forward, which is also really, really good. But Ryan Leake did a documentary and wrote a book called Chasing Failure.
Hmm.
And his story is so phenomenal. You could find it on YouTube. He's done some really amazing things, but his point was, what would I do if I couldn't fail? Or what can I prove I'm going to learn from chasing failure? And so he set out to quote unquote become an NBA player. And and the way he tells the story is great because he's not tall, he's not fast, he's and but what he did was he just started writing letters to because he's making a documentary and he started writing letters to NBA teams. And as soon as he'd get a rejection letter back saying, "Thank you, this sounds like a lot of fun, but we're gonna say no," he would adjust his next letter because he would get data from that failure. And so
Mm,
this whole book and the documentary is on how to gather the data from your failures to actually have your bigger win.
mm,
And so he ended up, I'm going to spoil it, getting a tryout with the Phoenix Suns. And and his story of how that tryout went is he's very funny. But it's a great story and a great reminder that you can actually learn more from your failures than you can your wins. And we do need to celebrate our wins. I start all my client calls off with wins. But if we don't fail, we don't learn anything about ourselves. In my bio, I talk about how resilience was something that I learned it had to be earned. And resilience is this idea, or the definition of resilience is the ability to bounce back after a hardship. And if you can't bounce back, if you have no bounce back power, then you're not going to get up and move on to the next thing. And the best way to develop that resilience is to keep trying new things and failing at them and bouncing back. It, kind of like one of those punch bag things that, like as kids
Mhm.
have that go all the way down, boing, and pop right back up. If it doesn't have the right amount of air or the right amount of sand in it, it's not going to work. So I think that that's an important thing to remember. And here's the thing: when we know ourselves, when we understand who we are, then we have, again, the courage to take those failures or to take those risks and to find that data and say, what can I do different next time? And then do it differently. And that's where it comes from.
Yeah, you kind of have to look at every situation as either a lesson or a blessing. Like you have to
Yes.
understand that those situations that you're going through, you should learn from it if you fail, but if it you succeed, understand that it could have went, but
Hmm.
it didn't, and so you should be appreciative of what
Yep.
happened. Like, I think most people, forget the opportunities that life is presenting you, in every day. Like, no matter what interactions, like us talking, like, I had the opportunity to
Mhm.
ask you, "What have you done in life?" And now I'm finding out all these things about you, and I could have just glazed over it. We could have been talking about whatever, but I think every interaction that you make with a person or just the opportunity to just sit at home and be safe or
Mm.
to go out into the world and explore. There's like the famous saying, ships are safe in the harbor, but
Mhm.
that's not what ships are meant to do.
No.
It's important for us to just learn, just go out
Mhm.
in life and explore. They say kids are like a bunch of scientists running around because they're just
Yes.
always trying stuff. And we lose that as we get older, but we shouldn't. We should continue to explore and continue to
Yes.
uh figure out what's out there for us. And as you were talking about earlier, find out who you are. And when you find out who you are, it's easy to do when you go out and do stuff, when
Mhm.
you go out and try things.
Well, and it's never too late, ever. And I love the story. I love the story that you told about the 69-year-old gentleman, but I am interviewing and going to be interviewed on his podcast, a gentleman who's like 85, and he was in Nazi occupied Netherlands. And so he's gone on to do all these things, and he like rides a motorbike everywhere he goes now at 85 or something. And it's just, I want to be that person, right? I don't want to go quietly into the night. I don't, now I don't have to be loud and stuff, but I want to go out helping people to the very end. I want my son to see that no matter what obstacles are put in front of us, we can accomplish what we need to accomplish. And, when we adopted him, we had no idea what ADHD really looked like. And now it's like we're total advocates, and and it just, you never know what life is going to put in front of you. And if you're not, I like to call myself terminally curious. If you don't cultivate that curiosity, you will miss out on so many things. And it doesn't have to be big. You don't have to go to the Eiffel Tower just because I want to take my kid there. You don't have to do something, you don't have to skydive at 80, you don't have to do any of that. You can find that curiosity factor in your own sphere. But if you get outside of your sphere, then wow, the world opens up. You can see things from different angles. And it it just would be sad to me to think that I would have stayed in the bubble, you know?
Yeah.
So,
I think that it's important for people to continuously like travel and do, like you were saying, it's evident in your personality that you are well traveled and stuff like that, because people who travel are open to things.
mhm.
Because if, like, you can tell a person who has not left home, like
My son doesn't like the long plane ride, so I'm gonna like start taking him like on shorter ones. I think our first inside the United States we travel, but I think outside of the United States, the first one's going to be something like the Bahamas. You know, it's not real far, and there's like a really lovely thing at the end. Because we took him to Hawaii, and he's like, "This is interminable," and I'm like, "It's okay, babe. Just read your book or play on your Switch." Um, but yeah, it doesn't have to be something big. And just to kind of, I know we're about to wrap up here, but to tell you my core values are my top one is freedom, which is it's everybody's freedom is defined differently. So when I work with someone, I actually help them figure out it's not just the word that you want to use, but it's what your definition of that word is. So sometimes the definition is going to be different. So for me, freedom is really freedom of thought. So my it has helped me in understanding why I didn't fit in well and work well in large institutions, because I need to have freedom of thought and they need me to follow their protocols. But it also has helped me in my communication with my husband, who loves consensus. So he'll say to me, "Wouldn't you agree that?" And I just look back at him and say, "Can you say it different?" He's like, "Ooh, what do you think about?" And then I'm like, "Yes, now we can talk, right?" So that's my top one is freedom of thought. My next one is authenticity, and that just goes back to this idea that I really have to be who I am. And I considered myself the black sheep in my family, and I have little black sheep things all over the place. I actually have one across the room, and it was my mother-in-law's. They picked it up in Spain when they were over there for when he was first, I think he was in the Navy, and it looks like an ink drawing of this black sheep, and then there's like this little thread coming out the bottom, and and I always want to pull that thread, just to see what's in there, because I always thought of the black sheep as being weird and different because I was different from my family. But now I see the black sheep as unique, and I want to be different, and it's okay for me to be unique. And so I want other people to be able to be themselves. And my third one is belonging. I thought it was community because I thought I was looking for something like that, but I realized it's really more a sense of belonging that does not need a large community to do that. When I am comfortable with myself, I can belong with myself. And, if it's just me and Jesus, we're okay, right? I mean, it's like, or me and my husband and my son, or me and my sister, if it's me and a big group of people, awesome. But I don't need it. But I want to make sure that when I am on a call or sitting in the room with someone or standing here talking to you or on the phone, I want to make sure you understand that you belong, right? So it's this welcoming stance that I have. I always want my arms to be open, and that's a defenseless position with your arms open, right? It's like everything is exposed, and with your arms open, you're free to embrace. You're free to do that. So for me, living out my core values means those things, and allowing myself to think freely. That's allowed me to do some deconstruction. It's allowed me to think that, oh, okay, well, just because I have a business degree doesn't mean I have to do that. Just because I have 25 years of experience in higher education administration doesn't mean I have to do that. I can work in a different way. But to always be true to myself. And I'd be lying to you if I said it was easy and then it just happens. It's constant work. But that is the beauty of it. And when I work with other people to do that and help them figure those things out, that's where I get all my reward.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's how you end the podcast. Andrew, it's been phenomenal having you on and talking to you about all the things that you've been doing. If you could just go ahead and give everybody like all your info and how they can reach out to you and learn more about you.
Sure. My website is The Intentional Optimist. So I am the intentional optimist, the original intentional optimist. So it's original. I mean, it's intentionaloptimist.com. I am on most of social media. I respond to DMs on LinkedIn, and it's Andrea Johnson. I also have a page there, and sometimes I do a newsletter. I respond to all of my messages in Instagram, and it's The Intentional Optimist at all of them. If you go to my website and just click on links, that's all the links pages. But I also have a special free download for your community that is theintentionaloptimist.com/. And the name of your podcast is, I always want to say Ramon. No, Romero.
Rebecca.
Romera. It's /Romera, and I've actually got it in front of me. But when you do that, you'll get a one-page free download of how to actually start the process of looking at your core values. And if that's not enough for you, because sometimes people need a little bit more, I do have a digital course and I do have hybrid coaching that I do with that, just depending on the level of assistance that you need. So that's the best way to get in touch with me. If you want to email me, I'll respond. Andrea at theintentionaloptimist.com. I answer all my own emails. So I would love to hear from you and know how I can help you be the best you.
Awesome. Again, thank you so much for coming on and talking about all the things that you've done and how you're able to help people get to where they need to be and be who they want to be.
And I just remembered, I also have a podcast called
Oh,
Stand Tall and Own It. And it's at all the different podcast places, including YouTube. So it's Stand Tall and Own It. Sorry about that.
awesome. And I'll make sure that I try and get all this stuff. So I'll put it in
Sure.
the show notes on YouTube. But again, yeah, thank you so much for sharing and everything. Is there anything else you got?
No, this is great. Thank you. It's my privilege.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.